Look, I opened this jar of rotten baby food, and well, a butterfly came out.
Welcome to the Comedians and Elevators podcast. I've got my guest, Karlyle Toms. Karlyle, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Carlisle Thoms, spelled with a K, Karlyle Tomms. You can learn more about me at my website, carlylethoms.com. My agent is Betty Butler at bjbpresents@gmail.com or 334-510-0003. I'm an author and a screenwriter.
Very cool. So, do you do some comedy writing?
I have done some comedy writing. I did a gay sitcom pilot. That was one of my very first ventures into screenwriting. And then I converted one of my novels into a screenplay after that.
And both were comedy?
No, no, actually, most of my stuff is not comedy. My first novel was supposed to have been a comedy, and it started out with me joking about this burned out old hippie woman who smoked. And when I was a girl, I would never dress out for gym class. That's because one nipple pointed up and one nipple pointed down, and all the children called me Tiddlywinks.
Ah, well,
So
there you
that was
there you
supposed
go.
that was supposed to be the joke. And I thought, well, what would happen if I just sit down at the keyboard and let her talk? She'll tell more funny stuff.
Yeah.
Instead, she wrote a whole dadgum novel and wouldn't shut up. And that particular joke never showed up in the novel at all. Uh,
Really?
and it turned out to be, I mean, there are some maybe funny episodes in it, but it turned out to be a fairly serious novel about the upheaval in the 1960s, the civil rights movement, racism, all the stuff that was going on with that, and her conflicted relationship with her mother. So it wasn't entirely comedic.
Yeah, that's a tough time. It's fairly recent that, comedy has really taken off, I would argue. Would you agree?
No, you think
Okay.
comedy has just recently taken off?
In certain details. So I just want to, I'm poking at you here with this one. So let's get into it, shall we?
Okay.
All
Well,
right. So the main topic, what were you going to say?
okay.
So I was just going to define the comic versus comedian. So I define the comic as any person telling funny jokes versus the comedian who's a funny person telling any jokes. And many people would argue that you start as a comic and evolve into a comedian. So, the first question is about the role of persona in comedy. So, how much of the comedian's voice is a character versus their real self?
A lot of it is a character. I think, well, and then I think about people like Wanda Sykes,
Hmm.
and she tells a lot of funny stories about her own life, but I think there's a lot of her in her comedy. There's a lot of me in my writing, even though I may not have intended that to be, and these may be characters who are nothing like me, but there's still a lot of me in my writing. Um, I think a comic doesn't just tell jokes. A comic tells stories that are a setup. And again, thinking about Wanda Sykes and thinking about some of the things that she's had to say. Um, I don't know that she necessarily tells jokes, but she gives caricatures of her family and the kids and her relationship with the kids. You know, I think Robin Williams plays lots of different characters when he did comedy. I mean, he was just like all over the place,
Right.
bouncing off the wall with constantly coming up with something else and something else and something else.
So, where I'm coming out with the more recent historical events with comedy is that it appears to me that a lot of comics or comedians are living the lifestyle of comedy more. And so that's where the material is coming from instead of just your life is whatever, and then you do the comedy on the side, and there's kind of a disconnect. Now it's becoming this self referential feedback loop. So, if you see it that way. Do you see that at all?
Self-referential feedback group.
And Wanda Sykes is in particular. That's why I brought it up because that's kind of my impression a little bit is that she's living, starting to live her or is living her life as if comedy is her life. Would you agree?
Hmm. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know her personally. I know that I was at Zany's in Chicago this past weekend and saw three comics there, and they all talked about their personal lives
Right.
and kind of made fun of their own personal lives and things that happened. And
Why I
um,
say that is, do you think that perhaps they're changing their personal lives to fit into the material?
I don't know. I wouldn't think so. I would think that maybe they would be looking at their personal lives and looking for material.
Right.
Ha
And
ha
then if
ha,
there isn't
that's
any,
funny. I can
you
use
create
that.
it, right?
Huh?
You create it if there's a lacking of material.
Yeah, I mean, well, a comic, I think, is constantly looking, a comedian is constantly looking for material. I mean, you don't want to have the same show over and over and over again, because people go, yeah, 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 I've heard that.
Yeah,
So they have to be looking for new material, new experiences, and what they can use. And where are you going to look for that? But in your own life, in your own experience, your own relationships with family and friends, and or
absolutely.
other encounters that happen to be such as some odd encounter in a airport or something like that.
Right. So does authenticity matter or is illusion part of the magic?
I think I think authenticity and illusion sort of blend together with that. I think there's a lot of authenticity in when comedians do their show. There's a lot of authenticity in what they're doing, but there's also the illusion that they sort of um, tweak the picture, so to speak, so that when they tweak it, it comes out and maybe is a different way. That there are some things that if you see them in person, they are not necessarily that funny, but a good comedian can make it funny in the way that they tell the story.
Absolutely. Perhaps rewriting history in a sense.
Well, I don't know that we rewrite history. Either it is or it isn't.
But if you're talking about your personal life and the truth is okay, but you need to embellish it a little bit. And now everybody knows this story as your past, but actually it's been highly augmented. That's
Mhm.
what I mean.
Okay. Well, and
I'm just
if
trying to rationalize. Why should I? Right?
yeah, if you think about it, everybody plays a role. And
Right.
we play different roles. We probably do not play the same role with the preacher at church as we do with the guy sitting next to us in the bar.
Right.
We don't play the same role with our spouse as we do with our children, yada, yada, yada. It's a different role. And we all fit into those roles throughout our lives.
We do indeed. All right. So how about punching up versus punching down? Where do comics versus comedians stand on this? So let me throw this one little bit at you as a possibility. Did a jealous medieval prince become the first comedian by killing the court jester?
I absolutely do not know how to answer that.
It's more to put it in context of the comic versus comedian, right? So
First
the
comedian
idea, right? The idea that the
chest.
audience's agreement with the comedian is a form of permission or alignment.
Yeah. What's that line in the song? There's a song from 60s, 70s, something killed the radio show or something like I
Yes, yeah, yeah,
can't remember the
yeah.
name of that particular
Well,
song or
it
band.
was TV killed the radio star. Yeah, TV
Oh,
killed the radio
yeah,
star.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and now
Uh,
internet killed the TV star, and then it wouldn't go
so
on from there.
the comedian killed the court jester.
Exactly.
I guess time marches on, eh?
So would you say that an audience's agreement with this is or with the comedian is a form of permission or alignment?
I don't know how to answer that.
It's supposed to be difficult, yeah. It's a
Yeah.
thought-provoking
Um, I know that different comedians go about their show in a different way. You know, there are comedians who interact with the audience
Hmm.
much more than others do. There are comedians who go down into the audience and ask questions and, just they're off the cuff, just whatever pops in their head that they happen to say. And then there are comedians who are up on that stage the whole time and they're doing their shtick and that's their shtick.
Yeah, that's right. You memorize material. So, cultural translation of comedy. How do jokes that work in one country bomb in another?
Because of cultural differences.
How does it, what is it like? How does it, have you, experienced it or know of it in any situations?
Um, have I experienced it? I'm trying to think of cultural situations, and I don't know that. Well, I kind of thought of this as funny at the time, and I told stories about it. Cultural differences. When I went to college, there was a student from Hong Kong and we had to drive 3 hours to get him an adapter for his rice cooker, which he had brought from Hong Kong, and it would not plug into American sockets. And so this is back in 1977, 78, and we had to just go hunting to try to locate, and no internet then,
Mm,
to locate an adapter for his rice cooker. And so he cooked a lot of rice. Now, growing up in the Ozarks, my relationship with rice was as a breakfast cereal. Never had rice in any other way other than my grandmother would occasionally make it for breakfast. And so we were in the cafeteria one day and they served rice. And I put a pat of butter on my rice. And David looked up at me like, oh my God, what are you doing? His name was David Chan. And so then I sprinkled some sugar on it. He was like,
hmm.
oh my God, what are you doing? Then I poured a little milk on it. And he started gagging and got up and left the table. So my experience with rice was completely different from his experience with rice. And therefore, to me, I thought it was funny that he got up, gagged and started and left the table when I poured a little milk on my rice. I now very much enjoy Asian rice.
So I could see how that builds, right? So it seems like there may be a nexus here where, the kind of disgust that he had built as you layered in more things into the rice. And it seems like perhaps it might have been the same thing when you went to find the adapter for his rice cooker is why not just get another rice cooker,
Yeah, yeah, that would have been an
right?
option.
Or you
And
started on the journey trying to find this adapter and it just became we must find this adapter at all costs, even if another cooker was 100 miles back the other way.
yeah, I don't know. I had never encountered a rice cooker before then. Okay, so I mean, I grew up in what I call the butt crack of nowhere.
Oh.
So I was we were 10 miles out of town. Town was the largest city in the entire county, and it was 2,000 in population.
How about
The
that?
next city any larger than that was about 6 to 8,000, and that was another hour away. And the next city larger than that was 3 hours away from where I lived. So yeah, butt crack of nowhere. And growing up in the Ozarks in the 1960s, raised by my grandparents, there's a whole heck of a lot I didn't know.
Yeah.
So when I went to college and I encountered students from all over the world and from all over the country, it was a very eye-opening experience for me. And yeah, we went looking for the adapter, but that tiny little town, the where I went to college is only about 10,000 people in that town. Uh, so I don't know if there was a rice cooker available
Yeah, I could. Now
anywhere
it
near
makes more
there.
sense. Yeah, there may
Yeah,
may not have been something you could have picked up anywhere.
I'd never
Um,
heard of a rice cooker.
but but there is rice around. I mean, it was available around you, right? Like you can
Hmm.
get in the market.
Hmm.
I guess different ways of cooking things. So
And
would you say
then
the
there was on TV, the rice roni, the San
yeah,
Francisco treat.
yeah, you already, it's already pre-cooked, kind of ready to go there.
Right.
So, would you say that comics are more universal while comedians are more culturally specific?
How do you define the difference between a comic and a comedian? Tell me that again.
A comic is any person telling funny jokes as opposed to a comedian who's a funny person telling any jokes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I would have defined it that way. I kind of have always seen comics and comedians as the same thing, is that the two names for the same career. Anybody can tell a joke. I mean, you get
And
with
that's where it's
friends
coming
and
from. That would be a comic. If you're now you're putting on this aura of I'm telling a joke, so now you have automatically stepped into the role of the comic,
oh,
right? And
okay.
maybe, but the comedian is a funny person. They have internalized it, right? They have figured out more than just telling jokes.
Okay. And then maybe the comedian does it professionally. That that's
Absolutely.
that's the difference. Yeah.
But also online now we have, you can TikTok, you can just crank out jokes and be very popular.
Yeah, it's kind of addicting scrolling TikTok.
It is. It is,
See.
and most of it is comic, as I would argue. I mean, there are just some funny videos because of kind of who they are, but you don't know who these people are. But the people that telling jokes on TikTok, well, at least you hear them telling a joke, right? So I would put that in the comic category.
Right.
That actually leads more into the next question, which is crowd work versus crafted work. So I'll argue that the comic riffs like influencers and comedians perform like in reaction videos. So the question is, where is the sweet spot?
Where's the sweet spot? I don't know the answer to that. These are all questions that since I try to be funny at times, but I am not a professional comedian. So these are questions I haven't really thought of before.
Which makes it more honest and more interesting because even professional comedians don't think of these questions until they're asked, and then they can never unthink of these questions ever again. So that's then it becomes quite obsessive. So, but the idea of crowd work versus crafted work, right? So, for example, what happens when a comic leans too much into crowd work, or when a comedian gets heckled?
Okay, so crowd work would be those folks who go down into the crowd
For
and
example, yeah.
who are spontaneous with asking questions of different people. And
Especially if they're not set up and they don't know what the answer is going to be. Even though they
right,
ask a question, usually you want to know what the answer will be. But yes, that would be
yeah.
crowd work.
So yeah, they're kind of spontaneous. And you see a little bit of that combined,
Right.
with various different types of comics and comedians. Um, but you have to go on stage with an idea at the very least.
Yes.
If you've not crafted that idea and you go on stage and you just wing it,
Yeah.
you better be very, very witty.
A
Because,
100%. Yeah.
right.
It's a recipe for failure. That's for sure. But true crowd work can work. You just need a pretty receptive audience,
Yeah,
very
a receptive
interactive. Yeah.
audience, and you have to be witty, and a few drinks in the audience makes a big difference.
Yeah, it'll smooth out the rough edges, that's for sure.
Right.
That's definitely for sure. So what happens when a comic, oh, we already asked that. Okay, much more important question is advertising and self-promotion. Who advertises themselves more, a comic or a comedian? You know that place where you're not conscious and you're not sleeping either? That's your power bill to the electric company. Right here. I want us to be here with free energy, where the Wardenclyffe Tower meets the Eiffel Tower. But that's not where we are. We are here, where you've got the utility and you've got residential solar. Between these two, we know which one saves you money. This is where we can go in the meantime. But this is where I want us to be now, and this can be done now. So let me deputize you to represent DOSE, Department of Solar Efficiency, and let's get on the podcast and get the message out today. See you soon.
Well, by your definition, I would have to say to probably be the comedian
How
because
so?
they're the one making a career of it. And comics are these funny people who go and do their own little videos on TikTok. I have done that. I've done Mr. Garden Hat
Okay.
on TikTok.
Okay. Do you want to
So,
elaborate?
well, I could go get my garden hat and put that on.
Well, are these, is it, so is it a, what kind of character? I'm assuming it's a comic character, not a comedian.
Yeah,
It's about the
yeah.
visual
I got
aspect of it.
something to say.
Okay.
Funny thing, when I put this hat on, my whole demeanor changes and my accent changes, and I get very, very southern when I put on this hat. And then I think about things like it's so wonderful when the magnolia is in bloom the gladiolas are in bloom, but it's not so pleasant when the chlamydia is in bloom. But I'm
So that's very good. No, it's very good. I would put that as a comic more because you're putting on a character, right? It's
putting on
not
a
actually,
character. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And so the difference between the comedian, it would be, it would like if it would, that would be an example of a comedic action while doing a comedy kind of set. So yeah, I mean, I think the highest level of comic you can be, honestly, is what you just did now.
So the comic is putting on a character as a
That's
character
one example. I would
speak.
say one example, like the Venn diagram. This is what you just did is right in that middle spot of the Venn diagram overlapping the two.
Hmm.
That's where I would put it. Fair enough.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
It's all about definitions, right?
Well,
So,
and yeah,
yeah,
the comedians do not necessarily put on a character. I'm thinking of the three comedians that I saw in Chicago last week, and they did not put on characters. They were themselves telling stories about themselves and making fun of those stories, so to speak, kind of making fun of themselves on stage
right.
and their families. Uh, but they were not putting on a character.
Okay. So that kind of leads to censorship and offense. So does a comic avoid offense while a comedian courts it to prove a point?
I think offense depends on the person. I know that one of the things that I had heard about that comics or comedians would do is that they would sort of try to gross each other out with the
Yeah.
most offensive, horrible thing that could possibly be said. Kind of goes back to when I was in college, they told dead baby jokes, and it
Mhm.
would be that sort of thing. Just how offensive can you get?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The kind of trying to generate anger, which is not even an
Yeah.
emotion, right? You're
And
just like
some
a,
comedians, it's like you laugh at them and you think, oh my God, I can't believe they're getting away with that.
right.
And some comedians kind of keep it toned down quite a bit. They might throw an F-bomb here and there, but they don't necessarily get super offensive with things. But I think
Now,
offensiveness depends upon your own sensibilities.
well, the character you just did is, I would argue, mostly comic. So I have to ask, are you avoiding offense when you're doing that character, or are you possibly courting it?
You know, I'm sort of split in two.
Right.
There's a part of me that's an actor. There's a part of me that does various different characters. There are
Mhm.
several different characters I can do. And so there's the other part of me that is kind of an activist. And, I had a 42-year career as a clinical social worker. And so I very much believe in mental health and that happiness is a set of skills we learn and maintain through regular practice, and that everybody deserves respect and honor and dignity. I have a t-shirt that I designed that said, certified member of the human race, deserving the same respect, honor, and dignity as every other member of the human race. And so there's that side of me, but there's also the side of me that just wants to cut loose and be funny. And sometimes there's a part of me that says, don't do that. Don't do that. Stay serious.
Mhm.
And yet, one of my favorite quotes is Oscar Wilde, life is too important to be taken seriously.
I think honestly, I think that your character is a perfect opportunity to dabble in offense because you're right in that middle spot right there where you know you're committed to it, but it's comic and it could go into more of the comedian. So that's what
Hmm.
I would like to see. I know I'm
Well,
just
the,
throwing out
the first
options.
character that I showed you, I call her Wilma Wobble. Wilma could get very offensive. There are lots of things that she could say that would be very offensive in terms of, you
Well,
know,
is it offensive to her or offensive
oh,
to
well,
everyone else? See, that's what I'm saying is
of
it's
course,
offensive to you as a
she, of
as a
course,
person, not the character.
right. She would have no filter. She would say whatever she wanted to say.
Hmm.
Um,
Now, are you offended by whatever she says?
I'm not offended by it, but I have the feeling that there would be certain people who would be offended by it. And as within writing, with writing a book, it depends on your audience. Who is your audience?
Yeah.
And the audience makes a huge difference. There are audiences that you can just pull out all the stops and have a go at it, and they think it's hilarious. There are other audiences that go, that's disgusting,
Mm.
you know.
But would your character find it disgusting?
No, she has no filter. She has no filter. She doesn't care. She'll say whatever she wants to say.
Sounds
I
good.
just
Sounds
I
fair.
haven't done her yet. I haven't
Ah,
I haven't shaved off the goatee and put on the makeup and the muumuu and the bra with water balloons in it and all
the
that it
reason,
would take to
yeah,
do her.
the only reason why I ask is because I find it very interesting where if you're putting on a character, it's a caricature really of the character that you Carlyle is actually offended at what your caricature that you created is saying, but you still do it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's in there. And a lot of that is you have to understand that I was raised in an extremely fundamentalist authoritarian church.
Okay.
And there are a lot of rules that were indoctrinated into me that I have a hard time letting go of even after
I,
all of these years.
sure.
I
Yeah. It's
have I
in
and then
childhood.
that whole thing of growing up gay in the Ozarks in the 1960s in the butt crack of nowhere in an authoritarian rigid church
Yeah.
and feeling like you have to play a role to make other people happy. I've got to
Okay.
pretend to be straight. I've got to pretend to like girls and to be manly and yada 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 when that's not really who I am. So
I
there's
see.
still a part of that. There's still a part of that in me that wants to pull in on the reins, even though there's that other part of me that wants to just let her rip.
So, do you have an authoritarian character?
Uh,
Ha! I knew it.
in my book, The Calling Dream, the protagonist of that novel is he's a kid that grows up in a fundamentalist church in the Ozarks, and he becomes a famous televangelist. And so what he preaches from the pulpit, he does not practice in his life. He's a sex addict and he seduces women. And he finds out that when he becomes a famous televangelist, that he has all of these women available to him that they kind of are like groupies at a rock show. And on one hand, he takes advantage of that and seduces these women and hides it from his wife and from his following and from the church. And on the other hand, he hates himself because he knows it's a sin for him to be doing this. And so he's living a double life. And, that kind of reflects the double life that I was living as a gay man. I was not going out and seducing anybody, but that whole idea of just being able to give myself permission to be who I am. That
Yeah.
took a lot. It took a huge amount of courage. And I think maybe more courage for my generation than it would take for the younger generation. Although, I see things, I contribute to the Trevor Project, which is a suicide prevention hotline for LGBTQ youth. And, so there's still lots and lots and lots of people who feel like they don't fit, they don't belong, they're not allowed to be themselves. And I think one of the things that a comedian or a comic does is they push the envelope.
Hmm.
There are lots and lots of, look at George Carlin, talk about pushing the envelope. He pushed the envelope. And I think that Robin Williams did as well. Wanda Sykes does. There are lots of comedians who push that envelope.
Well, speaking of envelopes, as comedy, as commentary, when does a comedian cross into becoming a philosopher or a preacher?
You know, the comic tells a joke just to get a laugh.
Right.
The comedian may have a an agenda. For instance, in one of Wanda Sykes' shows, she talks about it's easier being black than it is being gay. Of course, she's lesbian. And she said, I didn't have to come out as black.
Hmm.
And then she does this whole bit about her mother going, "You're black, you're black. Oh Lord, why couldn't she have cancer?"
Hmm.
And, she goes through that whole thing. But what she's saying is, it's not easy to be in any oppressed minority, but maybe it's easier to be black. You're not expected to play a specific role necessarily if you're black. You're not, it is nobody's telling you you can't be yourself if you're black that I know of. I am definitely open for any of my black friends or new acquaintances to correct me on that. But what she's saying is that it's really difficult to be influenced that you're not allowed to exist, that you should hide, you should disappear, that you should be invisible.
I could definitely see it. I mean, I almost see it like, judgment has already been rendered because you were born physically a certain race. So what are you going to change? But coming out, judgment is deferred until that moment, right? So no one's going to say anything until you do. And so the end result. You already seen how, well, I mean, they're born that way. I mean, visually. So what's going to happen here when I do it, right? It's totally different. So would you say that it's good or does it dilute the humor?
I don't think it dilutes the humor. I think that, those people who had the experience, I laughed my butt off when I saw that skit. I love that skit.
Yeah,
And she's right. If she, a good comedian takes a scenario that is tough like that and then sort of puts a comic light on it and allows the audience to maybe learn something. It's like we might learn more if we're laughing,
exactly. Yeah.
you know.
That's for sure how I see it. That's the
Mhm.
whole the whole the whole job of the comedian. So, last question, legacy. Who gets remembered? Will the comics type 5 survive time or will the comedian's cultural point of view be more timeless?
I think the comedian's cultural point of view may end up being more timeless because culture changes slowly, and George Carlin has been gone for a long time. And what he is saying and what he said back in the 1970s is relevant today. So, I very much remember him, and I very much encourage any of your audience to look him up if you don't know who he is. You can
uh,
find his videos on
for sure.
TikTok.
No, George Carlin is he's to be studied. I mean, he gives you the solution first, and then he describes the problem. And so you're kind of like, and he's pretty, I mean that technique alone is on point to do
Mhm.
it that way. So to me, that's the way to do it. Well, Carlisle, thank you so much for being my guest. Where can everyone find you online?
CarlyleToms.com. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, X, um, Blue Sky. Trying to think of all the ones that I'm on, but I'm on most of the different social media. A plug for my book, The
Yeah,
Gulls Are Always Laughing.
on Amazon, right?
Right. Well, it's on Amazon. It's Barnes and Noble. It's wherever. The and that was based the idea for that book came from when I moved to Texas and I had a horrible move, had a horrible experience, and I it just so happened that I lived across the street from a park and a beach, and I would go over there, and I'd realized that the gulls seemed to be laughing, and that was a reminder to me, laugh it off. This too will pass. You're miserable right now, you're pissed off right now, and you need to get yourself back to a lighter state of mind. And the gulls reminded me to do that.
And that's the way to end it with the seagulls.
Yeah.
Well, Carlisle, thank you so much. And for
Thank you.
everyone, please like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care.